Okay. Does that
Perfect.
work?
It does. We see you.
Oh, geez. This is okay. So I signed out and signed back in. Okay. Hopefully this will
Sorry
work.
about that.
No, it's my fault. I don't know. I don't know. This thing is frustrating. I think we need some UX folks on this. Okay. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
My whole screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Um, I wonder if I should have um the chat on the side here, or if I should just jump right into the talk.
Let's jump right into the talk, and then we can have the questions later on.
Awesome. Yeah. So, okay. I really apologize about that. I'm super excited to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share. I am a huge Figma fan. It's totally taken over my entire professional career and all the projects that I work on. And so I think it's a great opportunity. And the thing I'm most looking forward to is the end, where there'll be a conversation, hopefully some questions, and we can kind of learn more about each other and really talk about this community. So today I wanted to talk about communication. Communication has been the most powerful tool as a UX designer in my professional career. It's something I've struggled with. It's something that is so fundamental to the design, and so it's just something that I wanted to talk about and bring up a few concepts and some learnings that have had over the years as a designer. And so, my name is Sharif Matar. I'm a product designer. I'm fully remote. I've been fully remote before the world ended, um, and it was a lot harder to convince people to do the remote thing and the concept of it and how difficult it is, especially for much bigger, larger clients. And so I spent a lot of time working on that, and then after this happened, it was like, you've got to do remote. And it's like, yeah, sure. I've been saying that for a while. I grew up that's me. I grew up in a little island in the middle of the Pacific, and when I was a kid, and still to this day, I have dyslexia. So I struggled in reading and writing. I struggled a lot, and there's this one memory I have as a kid that is scarred in my memory, and it haunts me to this very day. And to protect the identities of my classmates, I will be just using random Google image search photos of kids in a classroom to tell this story. So it was a class, um, and we were learning to read, and we had all kinds of books that we had to read in class. And this is imaginary me making friends, really wanting the attention and to be popular and to make lots of um, fun friendships in class. And it came around where we all had to sort of read, and one by one, we had to read out loud in front of everyone. And so the teacher would call on random students. And so whenever this happened, um, because of my dyslexia, which at the time I didn't know about, and at the time it wasn't really a big subject and a ton of awareness around it. And so I was mortified. I was my hands got sweaty. Was usually a pretty outgoing kid, but whenever this came up, my hands got sweaty, and I just got super afraid. And I would really struggle to read, and so I would always try and hide or not be called on when this happened. And one day I was called on, and I tried to start reading, and I kept getting scrambled, and I kept really thinking see me, and I totally had basically a panic attack, and everyone started laughing and making fun of me, and it was very sad. And this is my best friend throwing a piece of paper at me, and everyone making fun of me. And so this is the story that sticks with me, and these are the kinds of things that you just never forget about, and sort of scar you. And the idea of even just talking in front of people is actually not a unique fear. They've done studies, and every year, public speaking actually is like at the top of the list of like the most feared activity. So anytime we're engaging and communicating, especially in public, it's a terrifying thing. And so I mean, it ranks above clowns and ghosts and zombies. So if there was ever a zombie apocalypse with clowns and ghosts and everything, that would be no problem. But if we had to sort of rally the troops and give a presentation or talk about how to deal with that situation, I think we're out of luck. Over the last 10 years, I've actually been a designer, and I've worked with companies, big and small, startups and Fortune 500 companies, basically integrating and working with teams on creating better user experiences. So much of this work, so much of my work over the last 10 years or more, has just been connecting and communicating. And so communication to me is one of those core fundamental design practices and tools. And it's the fundamental purpose of design. So whether you're communicating and making an interface that communicates more effectively with a user, whether you're doing research and trying to understand a problem, or you're just trying to collaborate over a long-term project with your team, communication is completely fundamental to design. Like the tools change, the practices, the way we research, the way we conduct ourselves is always ever evolving, especially with tech. But communication, there's some fundamental laws and concepts that I found incredibly powerful as I've worked on products, large and small. So I wanted to talk about those, and I took these concepts. They're actually from Emily Anholt, um, and she talks about these concepts of well-being, and I'm going to kind of put them in the context of communication, um, and to illustrate basically these ideas that'll really empower designers within organizations to be more effective, to excel in their careers personally, but also just to create better products. Right? When we're aligned, when we communicate well, using some of these concepts, we're able to sort of advance and bring clarity and understanding and have healthy sort of debates and discussions, right? And deal with real issues and actually just make better experiences for people. So communication, again, is fundamental to this practice that we call design. And so number one is self-awareness, right? And what is self-awareness? Self-awareness is on a very basic level, right? Being able to take a step outside of ourselves and see how we're being perceived, right? And in doing so, by being more self-aware, what we're able to do is recognize how we listen, right? How when someone else is presenting, when someone else is communicating with us, how we can focus and how we listen and how we pay attention to them. And oftentimes, the keys to that is, when they're speaking clearly and simply, right? When they're concise, when they're brief, it increases our understanding. When there's a clear goal to the conversation, right? What's the purpose of this conversation? And so, oftentimes, the best way to start when you have a meeting or a discussion or a presentation, or you're sharing wireframes, you have a check-in, or you're trying to understand a problem, the best thing to start with is just a key takeaway, right? What's the goal or what the main message, and just start with that. And so the key here is just like you can say it in a sentence, right? Being brief is a key part of this. And again, when we're self-aware and we understand when we're listening to someone else present, we can kind of put ourselves in their shoes, and speak and communicate in a way. That speaks directly to them and takes them into consideration, right? So it focuses everyone on the idea to remember, right? And so we'll actually be able to sort of have that takeaway and like the overall purpose. Everyone knows why they're there. You really set expectations, and when you set expectations, you actually increase understanding because people are able to sort of follow along. The next one, so number two, is empathy, right? And so we talk a lot about empathy in the context of design. And with empathy, the key thing here is, right, what language are we speaking, right? And with design, oftentimes we're in this world of sort of experience, empathy, feelings, accessibility. These are the things we prioritize, right? These are the things we value, right? And so these are sort of the cultural norms, and even the sort of technical lingo that we use, um, and to sort of validate, right, and to sort of support our decision making. But oftentimes these are not the priorities of other people, right? Other team members, other core sort of parts of the team and pieces of that puzzle, especially if you're working on complex projects or larger teams or within organization, right? So these aren't always the same priorities as a designer that other people have. Right? When we're saying things like a heuristic review or a contextual inquiry, right? To some folks, that just doesn't matter. It's not that interesting, or they don't even have context on what that is. And so, one of the key things here with empathy in this context is finding a shared language and making sure that, in the same way that we're considering the end users, right, the people that we're researching to create better products for, we try and understand their mental models and their framework and their lexicon. We need to do that with our team members internally at the organization, right? And when we do that, it makes sense to the listener, right? We're actually connecting and speaking their language. It makes ideas relatable, and relatability is such a core foundation of being able to sort of connect and understand and actually advocate for the team's work and the team's products and the work that they're all sort of collaborating on. And it creates that alignment that really holds the team together, especially when things get difficult or problems arise. And so if you think about sort of what are business priorities, right? Things like liabilities and risk. These are the kinds of things and the framework and the language that'll stand out. And so how do we think about design in the context of business priorities, right? If we're speaking to sort of managers or different um, business folks, um, how can we use their language to really frame things against the things they're prioritizing, the things that they care about, the things that they're on the line for, right? Oftentimes I bring up risk. Risk is one of those core sort of frameworks and a lens through which, within the context of design, it's not a big a term. In the context of business, it's everything. And so oftentimes bringing up how you can use design and research and validation and testing and prototyping to lower risk. It's such a powerful way to connect and to get everyone on board and everyone thinking in terms of using research to sort of validate things and lower the amount of risk involved in time and money commitments, right? So with a project manager, oftentimes thinking in terms of timeframes, milestones, check-ins, with a developer, um, the language is often of, how do we decrease the amount of rework? Recoding is a huge waste, and it's a huge hassle for a lot of development teams. And so if we're thinking about, design and prototyping and testing before we actually get into development, that's speaking their language, because what we're doing is we're lowering the amount of rework when we actually validate something's working beforehand, before we get into code. And all of this comes to say that, people who think they have the answers can improve, right? And so if we come to and we show up and we talk about all of our design terms and our sort of lingo within design, whoever we're working with and collaborating with, and we think we have the answers, and we're not open to sort of criticism or feedback or a different way of thinking about the products that we're building, right? We're never going to be able to sort of improve, and we're also not going to get them on our side, right? In collaborating. So good designers are learning from experience, right? And the best learn from everything and everyone, right? So they're open and they're taking in all of these different inputs, and they're bringing everyone else to the table. And what they're doing is they're building trust, and they're building other advocates for their work, right? And it becomes sort of this shared project that everyone's sort of involved in and has a sort of stake in, right? And the concept here that I think is so fundamental, that really helped me reframe um, my thinking and my sort of collaborations and the trust that is built between teams, is that, right, we know truth exists, right? But the truth is we can only ever have one side, one perspective of the overall truth, right? It's impossible for us within ourselves to really see outside of our own perspective. Um, and so by including more perspectives, by getting criticism, by getting that feedback, by getting different points of view, especially by different folks from different teams, different departments within an organization, within a product team, you're really, really just making your understanding, and you're lowering risk, and you're bringing everyone else to the table, and you have a lot more sort of sense of the whole picture, right? So number three, we're going to talk about willingness to play. So this is a fun one, right? So being able to sort of actually enjoy yourself, and there's some incredible research around play that is fascinating. And so humor and when we're sort of in play mode, right? We're less defensive, but more importantly, we're actually far more creative. And there's been a ton of actual um, psych sort of science and research on this subject that's really, really fascinating. When teams use humor, when teams are able to sort of take risks and feel sort of emotionally safe, but also just have fun and joke around, they're actually more creative. They're actually able to problem solve better. So people have fun, they're more creative, healthy conflict helps put ideas to the test. And so when we actually have trust, when we joke around, when we build relationships, there's actually more of an ability to have healthy conflict, right? And so what is healthy conflict? Because most people, and this is from Fight Club, the movie, most people, uh, normal people, do just about anything to avoid a fight, right? So this is like, in all cases, we're almost afraid to have conflict, right? And we're afraid to ask questions. We're afraid to sort of make friction. But the truth is, friction can actually be really helpful as long as we're sort of respectful, right? And we have trust between team members. Being able to challenge each other and call things out when they don't make sense is incredibly powerful and helpful. But all of that depends on whether there's trust and whether there's a foundation, that sort of the team members are safe, and that they can sort of disagree and have these disagreements, and sort of there's a playfulness even when you're sort of disagreeing and sort of playing out ideas and challenging each other. Those are again how you're getting more perspectives at the table, more diversity um, of opinions, right? And so we shouldn't be afraid of conflict. Healthy debates and respectful disagreements can lead to business growth, right? So number four is curiosity and checking on time. I know I wasted a lot of time in the beginning with the technical stuff, but curiosity, this is one of my favorites. And this is a dead cat for obvious reasons because of curiosity. Active listening and rapport, right? And so we know about active listening and rapport from our qualitative research methods, right? Where we're interviewing people, we're talking to people, but being able to sort of do this in the context of a presentation with our team, no matter the importance or the sort of level of the meeting or the check-in or the presentation that we're giving, um, when we're more present, when we're actively listening and building rapport, we're actually able, again, to be more creative, and pay attention longer, and have healthy sort of conflict, helps put ideas to the test, right? So, um, this great quote by George Bernard Shaw: "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place." Right? And so if we're not actually able to sort of call each other out, and on the previous one with healthy conflict, but even more, if we're not actually curious enough to actually get the answers, or if we don't understand something, or if something doesn't make sense, or we actually think we should explore this other direction, right, and iterate in a different way, if we're not curious enough, um, then we may just sort of be afraid to like not bring something up, and we may miss something, or someone just might think it's not worth it. But if we actually bring a sort of sense of curiosity, we do some incredible things start to happen, right? And so when we show up, we make people feel like they matter, right? We care about what they have to say because we're genuinely curious and listening, and care about their points of view. And so they're more willing to ask questions, they're more willing to share their ideas, and they're more willing to be curious and pay attention, and be focused when you communicate as well. right? And so it's one of those things that builds on top of itself. And by just introducing it first and bringing it forward, and being genuinely curious, you're going to call out things. You're going to ask questions, no matter how silly or dumb they sound. And often, some of the best ideas, some of the best ways to sort of avoid some of those biggest risks, come out of our ability to be curious and ask those difficult or weird or uncomfortable questions, right? I don't understand. Can you please explain this to me? Right? As opposed to just avoiding that. Uh, and also, when people ask that of you, right? Excited, because that means they're curious, and that means that they're not understanding, but they actually care enough to ask, right? So, some of the ways I do this um, are by asking questions like this, right? So, in conversation, in presentation, um, let me say this back to you, what I think you just said, so I can be sure I understood you correctly, right? So this is when people are asking questions, when people are having dialogue, when you're sharing the work that you and they have feedback, right? Um, Actually being able to sort of summarize what they've said to you, your understanding of what their question or their feedback is, um, it builds trust with them, because it shows that you care enough to really, really understand the underlying criticism or point that they're trying to make. And then again, it sort of gets that feedback loop going where both folks are curious and you have this sort of compelling, sort of present conversation. Right. And so all of these different ways, I hear you saying this, right? Is that right? Um, it sounds to me like you feel or think this way. Did I understand you correctly? And it creates this great sort of rapport between you and the team, right? So these all are sort of confirming questions. And again, curiosity builds rapport, and builds understanding. And it just makes presentations and dialogue and conversation so much more effective. One of the tricks I always sort of think about is if this individual or the people that I'm talking to have this secret, right? And they may not even know that they have this secret, but the secret is somewhere inside them. Everyone that I talk to, everyone I get the chance to be able to sort of connect with or present to, that they all sort of have this little piece of information or this little secret, um, that if I'm just curious enough and I'm able to sort of get to that truth and show and respect them enough, that I can actually get access to that secret or that piece of information that's going to make my work or my life just that much better, right? And people are aware, people are smart, people understand when this is sincere. And so I always just remind myself, right? Everyone has this little secret that's going to improve my life and my work. And number 5 is gonna be mindfulness, right? We hear mindfulness a lot, in the context of this crazy mess of a world that we're living in with technology everywhere and noises and so much information. It can be incredibly overwhelming, right? Um, just not just for work and productivity, but literally just for mental health and our own sanity. And it feels like it's getting worse, right? You ever realized you're like sitting at a table or connecting with a friend and everyone's just on their phone? It can be a little bit jarring, but I think the most uncomfortable part is just like how comfortable or like normal that can sometimes feel, whether it's with family, friends, or coworkers, right? And a lot of it comes from us not being able to sort of be mindful and present, right? Um, so, so much of this is about being present. And this one is a big practice, right? This is like something that we're never going to achieve, but it's an ongoing sort of practice. Um, but again, when we're present, when we're focused and engaged with others, we're able to sort of be more mindful, and actually sort of show up, answer their questions instead of sort of waiting to speak, instead of sort of getting an idea and then um, having that be on your mind and sort of wanting to share this or get this point across. Being present and actually sort of fully aware of your surroundings and the moment, again, it makes us incredibly more creative and able to sort of problem solve, hear each other, get information that we don't already have, right? Instead of sort of waiting to bring up these main points that you want to make or the statement that you want to say, we're being present and we're sort of letting go of that, letting that melt away, and we're being present enough to just right engage, right, and be there. And again, this is one of those things that's um, those impossible goals, right, that we all strive for. So what happens is when you do this and when you show up and when you take full responsibility for being present, what happens is folks will start mirroring that, right? When we sort of expect this or demand this or require this of others, oftentimes it sort of backfires, right? And so most of all of these things that I'm talking about are things that we can take responsibility for and that we sort of control how we show up in all these different ways. And then folks around us will see that and that will sort of be mirrored. And so that will be sort of given back, right? And what we know is that people can listen longer and remember more, right? And then they're more patient and forgiving, right? If you think about if you're present and you're listening to someone and they're making a mistake or they're talking about something or they're sharing, you're oftentimes most people are pretty forgiving, right? They're rooting for you. They really want you to succeed, right? And so that's really good to remind ourselves that people are there for you as well. And then it also helps with not overthinking, right? Because so often our brains are just totally cluttered with all these different things, right? What am I having for lunch? What did I do yesterday? What's happening next year? All these different things are going through. But if we take these times and take these moments as a practice to be mindful, especially when we're communicating and showing up with each other in communication, it's going to make that communication so much more powerful and effective. Um, Another really helpful tool that I use and I bring here is helping others to be mindful. Is just acknowledging how I learn and how sort of I remember and how I know things, right? It's the same for a lot of people, and so you have this basically this framework, right? I forget what I hear, right? Oftentimes, if it's just sort of said to you or spoken to you, people are going to forget it, right? I remember what I see, right? So this is the power of prototypes using tools like Figma on low to high fidelity prototypes to actually show and demonstrate, and always make sure that as much as possible your check-ins, even if it's just a sketch, or even better, just some sort of a visualization wireframes, you're showing, not telling, right? As much as possible. It helps people be present. It helps people remember. It helps people be mindful and understand. And then the absolute best is going to be getting people involved, right? So I know what I do. If they're actually involved, right, in the research and in your process, and actually just talking about the work that you've done to get the thinking that was involved, right, to get there, and actually including them in that discussion, right, and getting that feedback and focusing that feedback so that everyone's involved. People actually understand, they know, and they have a stake, right? And my little mantra is, you're just here with your attention focused outward towards the person or persons you are interacting with, right? And it's sort of like every time you catch your mind wandering, you sort of acknowledge it, right? And you kind of bring it back. And the last thing, um, the concept is resilience, right? So resilience, um, to me oftentimes is understanding myself, right, in the picture of things, and really understanding sort of my insecurities, my ego, and how that sort of shows up in the work that I'm doing, and just reminding myself that if I genuinely care about improving or making great experiences, right, as a designer, right, that's my role, that's my job. um, if I want to make better products, if I want to sort of improve my work and the work of my team members and the work and the experience of everyone using and touching the sort of products that you're able to sort of contribute to. Um, Criticism, critique, feedback, breaking things, making mistakes, that's all a part of this, right? Um, and understanding it as a gift, right? It's really not about me, right? Just checking myself and not putting myself and identifying myself within the work that I'm doing, and just really trying to throw the work up against the wall and toss it around and get as much feedback as possible, right? Um, and just really crystallizing what that could possibly be, and just knowing that it's just going to make me and everyone else stronger. So use criticism to connect and build trust, right? When you actually care enough to sort of take criticism seriously and say, wow, that was incredibly helpful. I really appreciate you calling this out or identifying this or catching this, right? Then that person is going to say, oh, wow, they actually take me seriously enough to acknowledge my criticism, and I feel safe to bring up these criticisms. And I really actually want to take this person's ideas and their work seriously and respect the work that they're doing, because they're really respecting me, right? And so all these kinds of setbacks, they teach us how to play the game, right? So I'm a fan of sort of stoicism, and a stoic sort of philosophy. And one of the most powerful concepts I find is this concept in stoicism of, right, all these sort of setbacks and challenges, they're neither good nor bad, right? Or sort of something doesn't go well, if you make a sort of a mistake, and there's a big challenge, it's neither good nor bad, right? It just is, right? And some of these setbacks, some of these issues, some of these triumphs, some issues may lead to much greater successes, and some triumphs may lead to like all kinds of issues that you can't foresee. And so when things happen, you just sort of acknowledge them and understand them, and just understand that this is sort of a game, and each level that you sort of pass is sort of leveling you up again for that next game, right? And sort of not taking things so seriously, right? And so many designers, so many creative folks often can be perfectionists, right? That their standards are so much higher than their own capabilities, or their current sort of process, or what they can actually create in terms of their output, and the work that they're doing. And so they're really hard on themselves. But that goes in conflict with actual progress, right? Because progress is messy, right? Sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards. And so, this is a great illustration of that. If you're a perfectionist, you may never get anywhere because it's not the perfect time. It's not the perfect thing. It's not good enough yet, right? And it's kind of the same as a procrastinator, where you have sort of fits and starts. But if you're an iterator, right, a designer, you're willing to sort of take a step back, learn something, fail, get feedback, get criticism, go backwards, right? But in the long run, you're making progress, in the big picture, and you get a lot farther. So, all these concepts, being more self-aware, empathetic to our team members, willing to sort of play, right, and have healthy conflict, just being more curious, mindful, and resilient. These are sort of the practices um, that are sort of an ongoing work that just make communication so much more enjoyable, work so much more enjoyable, and connections so much more meaningful. And then eventually the actual output, right, the products and services that we're working on, and that the whole world is sort of shifting and moving around a lot of this technology that's being touched by people all over the world. Um, all of these things are going to be incorporated in that, and it's just going to make that so much more meaningful. And it's going to make our effect just a little bit more better in the world. So, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this. And again, I'm super looking forward to hopefully connecting, following up, and answering questions if I can.
That's great. Thanks, Sharif. I'm going to pass it on to Bill now, and hopefully he has no technical issues, and we can get started with his presentation.
Great.
That was really cool, Sharif. Really cool. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, well, then we're more than halfway there. So this is like amazing. So clearly, your presentation, Sharif, was not only illuminating on how we should communicate, but clearly it helped this technology to work. so there you go. The good karma is already spinning off here.
100%.
Now, for the coup de grace, can I actually share my screen? That would be really something. Okay. Just a moment. Just a second here. Oh, right. Okay. Cool. All right. Okay, great. So if everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. This is good stuff. Okay, now, okay. So I want to talk about VEDAR, which is kind of something I came up with, but making design decisions is not. Most of this is something I've cobbled together from best practices, everything from Nielsen Norman to actually something Dwight D. Eisenhower came up with, a box for a priority matrix. It's good to figure out at any stage of what you're doing, what the most important thing to do is, what the least important thing to do is for your users, for the business, for the engineers, for everyone involved. Yeah. And I found, because I've been doing this for a while, that a lot of the art and science to everything to do with design really comes down to decision making. And that's why I'm so excited to share this with you, because this is something that I created in FigJam. So it's on the Figma community, and you're all welcome to duplicate it if you found it at all useful. I want to describe the situation that it addresses in brief, and then I'll show it to you in a little more detail to walk you through how you might use it yourself. Just a brief intro to me. I've been designing for a fairly long time, and I like to challenge myself to work in lots of things that I don't know about because I'm endlessly curious. And one of the things I think that really goes to your presentation, Sharif, is really recognizing our own ignorance. I think the more and more experience I get, the more the vastness of my ignorance is something I'm aware of. If I have one superpower as a designer, is that I can approach any situation, even if it seems like something I've done 100 times before, and see it through a beginner mind and go, I don't know what it's like to use this product. I don't know what it's like to be that person who is experiencing this pain point. So I'm curious, and you need to dig to understand that. And one of the other things is that as you go along through the process, which is another thing that Sharif was mentioning several times, is about the importance to not be a perfectionist and to not be unafraid to share designs and get criticism and fail, basically. The idea that if we just worked harder and did more research, we could get it one and done, and then it would be gold, and everything I've ever done is just gold, isn't really the way the world works. A master of anything is someone who's made every mistake thousands of times, so they see them earlier before they just fall off a cliff. So part of the thing in VEDAR is a value-based way to make your design decisions, where you keep a history of how you've made your decisions so that you can learn from what you've done right and what you did wrong, and why it was right before and why it might not be right tomorrow. And you can kind of tell from the name with VEDAR, which stands for value, effort, dependencies, assigning, and results. That it's kind of like radar, except it's for value-based design decisions. So just going through it, letter by letter, if you're looking at anything you want to design, the first thing is to figure out, how valuable would this feature be, or this big roadmap item, or just a design iteration. So like we have 4 ways that we can do a screen for someone to sign up. But no, I usually like to think of it as a whole feature. You know, we're thinking of features that we're going to add to a product. So, and I like acronyms. So actually, not really. I get kind of sick of them, but just to make it easier to remember, reach is very important. You know, how many users is a feature going to affect? And how much value is it going to have for the users who it's directly going to be affected by? Like, if you're making something that is a dating app, then you care about people who do a lot of dating. If you're making something that helps people schedule daycare, then you care about moms and dads and grandparents who are scheduling daycare. So you really need to know how valuable is a feature for your user base. But as a separate discussion, you want to talk to people at your business to establish how much business value is there. And these two things are both important to everything that you do. One of the fallacies that I've really found is that it often takes place in one discussion that doesn't involve users. So then you have a senior product manager or a senior manager to that who says, well, I'm a parent, or I date, or I do some of these things that our users would do. So I know what the users want, and I'll just speak for them. And I know, but really they just think about, you know, how valuable it would be for the business if it was good for the users. And I think it's really important that we're authentic. Like when we're really talking about business value, we're talking to business stakeholders. And when we're talking about user value, we're talking to people who have researched the users because they have a pretty good understanding, if that's already been done, and actual real users to validate that. But we have to take both of these things into account, combine them to determine what I'm showing here is a combine, the U and the B, which is the user value and the business value, and that is, you know, what's the combined value? And then you take that and say, well, how many users will this affect? If it's every single user of your product, wow, that could be a really important thing to do. But if you have this incredibly valuable feature for users, and then even if it's incredibly valuable for the business, but it's going to only reach a tiny percentage of the user base, so it's really important for a tiny percentage, then maybe it's not the most valuable thing, right? So let's say we know what the value is. Then we want to think about, okay, how hard will it be to build the thing? Because a really valuable feature is great. You know, we want to have like a whole list of things we want to design, we want to build that are going to be valuable. But, you know, the engineers have an existing code base. Everybody has got tech debt. They've got to work through. How hard will it actually be to support these things that we come up as wonderful design artifacts? Which hopefully we're working in Figma because it's the ideal way to communicate these things. So the engineering team and even the design team, you know, you might have something that's really easy to build, but it's hard to figure out how exactly we're going to structure, you know, something. I worked a few years back on something where we had to have an onboarding flow into an e-commerce platform, and you could come in from many, many different countries in the world where they have completely different standards for how you would pay for things. And it was actually very complicated from a design point of view, but what it actually turned into code-wise was not so complicated. So there's two different elements to the effort as I see it. And then if you have the value and you have the effort, then you want to think about, well, what are the dependencies? Like, if you are going to build this feature, you're going to need some service. So again, this is like an engineering thing. And it's so common that I thought it deserved a whole letter in this acronym to be called out. And then once you've got these two, this is where the magic happens. You can take any given feature or a whole series of features and assign it a position on the value and effort chart. And which leads right into the next step, which is ranking the features. So if you put the design decision overlay on top of that chart, it will tell you very clearly, this feature is in the yes, we should definitely do this because it's going to be very valuable. That's feature A, if you can't see my cursor. It's going to be very valuable and it's a low effort. So great. But this is a maybe if it's going to be like kind of valuable, but kind of a lot of work too. So we should probably do that too, but not first. And then if something is super hard to do and it's not that valuable, well, I guess we'll probably can it. But maybe we should remember why we don't do it, right? And then our final list. We take these and we stack rank them, and we use the results to create a work plan. So since I am often in the role of a design manager, this is often a big part of what I do. But even as a designer, it's important that you do the most important thing every day. So having a set of priorities is kind of important for everybody's work. Whether they're actually not even what we normally call design, if you're a researcher, what's the most important thing to research? If you are a product manager, what's the most important thing from your level? The engineering team has a backlog of priorities. So it's kind of the same sort of thing. So what I'd like to do now is jump out of this presentation per se and show you the actual thing itself. So bear with me for just a moment. Okay. So if you were to go to this shared community file, you should be able to see it here. Okay. Okay. So this has the slides I just went through, which is the VEDAR overview. What is it really about, and why would it be valuable to you? And in case I was blabbing a lot and not explaining, it's really a good idea when you are designing if you are always doing the most important thing, and if you document your decisions as you go along. So, you know, we want to actually end up with a set of features or variations on features or roadmap items that we're going to do, and we know how we came to those decisions. Because to iterate is very frustrating for the product team and the design team, and not just engineers, to go back and try to reinvent the same wheel in the same way, because the people involved aren't necessarily around, or they don't have it in their head. They don't remember why the same things were considered over and over again. So when we accept that iteration is the right way to design, then we want to keep a record of how we made our decisions. And almost everything kind of comes down to decision making. So, so these slides I was just talking through, they're all right here. They're the first part of this FigJam template that you're welcome to duplicate for yourself. So since I just talked through the slides, we don't need to go over that. But then you've got the steps explained. And this gives you a little bit more detail about how to actually do each one of the steps. And in case that isn't completely clear, we have an example where I created a fictional dating app out of Sweden. And you can sort of see, if we were evaluating these 5 ideas, how this would actually play out. And then we have a blank worksheet where you could do it yourself. So I basically want to talk you through this and then give you a hyperlink so that you are welcome to go and duplicate this and try it yourself. Because as Sharif was mentioning, me talking is not going to teach you anything. We are always our own best teachers by experiencing things ourselves. So this is the blank worksheet, of course, will make more sense when you've gone through the earlier parts. But since I'm going to talk through it, that you could basically jump right to the end. So let me just go through the steps explained. The gist of it, in case you wanted to do this or explain it to anybody else, is this is going to give you an optimal way to make really quick or detailed design decisions. That could be anything from deciding between quick wins for today to what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks in a sprint, to large roadmap initiatives that could affect the next 3 to 6 months. And among all these things that notions that people come up with, I mean, this would be a great idea, that'd be a great idea. What should we do first? What should we do next? And what shouldn't we do? What is just like a no-go, at least at this time. So we start off with a list of features that we would want to consider. And this would be a collaborative process where often you'd have the design team, PM, engineering lead, and sometimes you'd have a few more people, like individual engineers, who would throw out ideas. And customer support is obviously a very good voice because they hear about pain directly from users. So we have a bunch of ideas, and then it's like, well, do we want to do just what the highest paid person in the room thinks is a good idea? Do we want to do the thing that seems the coolest? I would argue that what we want to do is the most important thing, and that this process helps you find the most important thing. So one thing that's sort of a meta thing, before you specifically look at a set of features, is to think about your organization and have like an honest discussion with, the PM lead and the engineering lead, and to really agree upon how much with this product you care about the users versus how much you care about the business. If you were to make a wonderful experience for users and it had no business value, then you're all going to end up out of a job because it's not going to keep the lights on. There's a quote from Napoleon that I sometimes draw on. It's a rhetorical question to his troops where he asked them, what is the best virtue? And they all had their own ideas of answers. And he said, strength is the best virtue because it is the virtue that allows all other virtues to exist. And you would have to agree that if the company's not making money, then it will not allow us to do a great job for the end users. And if we love users, we need to also help the business make money. But that being the case, we still don't want to just say, okay, only do what the business needs and the users be damned, because that's what leads you into doing things like hiding an unsubscribed feature or making it damn near impossible to get out of your Amazon Prime membership, even though it was one click to get into it. That is, in my opinion, it's ultimately weak because it doesn't create a good reputation for the business. Whereas the best companies, the best brands in the world, they all focus very heavily on what's the right thing for the user that still has some business value. So if you have something that has user value and business value, you're probably in the good range. And there's different ways to think about it, like just how much you want to weight each one. And I like to call it the octane. It's like a fuel mixture. How much do you care about the users as opposed to the business? It's not a zero-sum game. You can have something that is great for both, but not everything works that way. So when we look at the value, as I was going through in the overview, you want to collaborate with some real users and stakeholders for users like researchers to figure out just how valuable would a feature be for those end users. And on a 0 to 10 scale, so if you had a feature and you're evaluating that one, you might say on a 0 to 10 scale, it's an 8. It's like, it's really a great feature. They would love to have this. But that same feature, if you go and discuss it with your management team, they might go, well, it's only about a 5 out of 10 for business value. So then you have an 8 for users and a 5 for the business. So you need to combine them, and it depends on just how much you care about the users. If you overwhelmingly care about users as opposed to business value, it could end up as a 7.7 as a mixture. But if you care about them equally, then it probably comes out as a 6.5. And I think there's nothing wrong with going 50-50, but below that, where it's kind of like you don't really care about the users so much, some bad things end up happening, because you could say this would be really valuable for the business if users wanted it. And that's the thing. When things like that get developed, nobody feels great about that, because it's not actually going to produce the long-term results anyone wants. So anyway, when you can combine the business and user value, then you kind of have a sense of the combined value, and then you multiply that by the reach. So, is it all your users, or half the users, or 10%, or somewhere in the middle? And that really produces like the value. So best case scenario is it's going to affect every single user. But oftentimes, if you've got a new feature and it's a mature product, it's more likely that it's going to be a much lower percentage. And you just want to be, honest about what that is, so you set correct expectations. Okay, so the next step is to have a separate discussion with your developers and say, okay, this exact same feature, maybe it's like a new way to onboard into your product. How difficult will it be to build it? And it's on a 0 to 10 scale as well, which, as opposed to being vertical, like the value is, the effort is horizontal. So perhaps we have found out that the level of effort would be a 3. So it's a 3 out of 10. It's not that hard, but it definitely is not a no-brainer. They're not going to just walk in and have, by noon clock out and say they're all done. So then, you do this same process, which really could take, you can do this all in one day if have a couple of meetings, or it might take longer if they're really big things. And then when you're talking to the engineers, like, what are the dependencies? So you might have a bunch of features and they don't have any special dependencies, but I have never been involved in a situation like that where the engineers didn't say, well, we're gonna have to make some API changes for this, and we have to add database things for this. There's things that they need to do. Now, why as designers do we care about that? Well, because we want to do the things that are the most important. So we want to know a true sense of the effort and how that effort breaks down. So in this particular case, we have a set of 4 features. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that the level of effort for each feature that's one thing. So, we have a 3, a 9, and a 10. But these first 3 features all need to have language translations added. And that in itself is a dependency that has a level of effort of 2. So if you take that 2 away from these, well, they all become smaller numbers. So this dependency becomes a very important thing to do in and of itself. Just like this API change 2, which seems to be something that would support 2 features. So you get a sense of the common dependencies. And this is going to help the engineers more than you, but it also changes the features. So now we could say that feature A actually is only going to be an effort of 1 if we're going to do that dependency. And feature D is only going to be a level of effort of 2 if we do another dependency. which we were probably going to have the engineering team build anyway. So now it's like they look much sexier for our stack ranking because they're easier to do. Okay, so what we've done with the first 3 steps is said, how valuable is each feature? What's the effort of each feature? What are the dependencies of each feature, which really just, the dependencies really just could influence the effort. So ultimately, we end up with value and effort, okay? And you've got a whole series of features, and I'm just going to show the first one. So if it ended up being, you know, the value to users in the business is about a 7.7 out of 10, and the effort to build it was only going to be a 3, then it has this position horizontally. That's a 0 effort, that's a 10, so that's about a 3 position. And vertically, that's about a 7.7. And like, you know, I make no attempt to be mathematically correct here. I mean, it's, you know, it's around an 8. But you can, you know, obviously just eyeball it. I mean, it's, you know, if we had just said, okay, it's, you know, approximately 8, approximately something, okay. Good enough. The main thing is that we can, it has a position on the chart that we've assigned. And then we can put this overlay on top. Now the overlay is where it becomes kind of magically good, because now we can see that that feature that we just evaluated is definitely in the yes quadrant. So we should definitely do it. And one of the other features was actually a bit more work and still pretty valuable, but fair bit of work. So it's a maybe, and it's also like further away from that top right corner. And then we have another feature, the third one, and it's like, whoa, you know, that's going to be super difficult and it's not that valuable. So I don't know. If we had nothing better to do, maybe we'd do it, but I don't think we should do it at all. it just doesn't not appealing. So you could imagine having more than 3. I just wanted to keep it simple here for illustration purposes. The closer something is to the upper right. So if we had another one here and it's like, you know, oh, okay, it'd be a 10 out of 10, and the effort is almost nothing. It'd be like so easy. It's just a brilliant idea. I mean, we all would love our everything to be like that. Well, you know, that wouldn't be just do it first. That'd be like do it right now, right this second. But you know, very few things in life are magically that good. So we take our list and we stack rank them. So we're going to use these results to plan the work. So make sure you do anything that's a yes. And then anything that's a yes or a maybe, stack rank those so that each one has its own unique priority order. And then anything that fell into the no category, well, don't do it at all, just drop it. But the main thing is to keep this, to keep all of this that led up to this, keep a record of all this, and just duplicate the template every time you go to evaluate any, you know, another set of 5 features or 6 features, so that we know how we actually came to our decisions. Why are our decisions the way they are? So just to make it more clear, and now I'm sort of lapping myself a third time. So I went through the slides describing this. Now I went through sort of the thinking behind why this would work. Now I just want to take you through an example, which I think should clarify it in a much more fun way. Another thing that I really liked your talk, Sharif, is that having a sense of fun is a better way to communicate with people, and it's a better way to I don't know, just exist on a daily basis, I think. So I wanted to have a little bit of fun with setting up an example. So I invented this thing called PlanLoss. So let's pretend we work for a Stockholm-based casual dating app, and it's more popular than Tinder in Sweden and Scandinavia, which Sweden's part of. And they have a unique market edge around the authenticity of their users, but they need to overcome language and cultural issues to enter the huge US market. And there's so many people and there's so much money to be made, but it's very competitive to get that 16 to 24-year-old Zoomers and the 25 to 38-year-old millennials who have a lot of disposable income. So let's say we work for Planlos, and it's a very good name for a casual dating app in Sweden because it's Swedish for unplanned. It's not going to make a lot of sense for the American market. So there's a number of issues. So the prime market for Planlos is people who put Instagram-worthy, unrealistic filtered pictures of themselves online. And even in casual dating, this can be actually really annoying because authenticity and value is valuable, and your looks really matter. People would like to meet people who look like what they expect. Just a thought. And as Planlos extended its success throughout Europe, there's been cultural pushback on the name because Planlos doesn't mean anything if you're not Swedish, and Swedish jargon throughout the product. So instead of saying it's a match, they say it's lagom, which lagom is a cool word, which basically means when you get something just right. Just like if the coffee is just right, it's lagom. So I used to work for a Swedish payments company, so I learned a few phrases from them. So Planlos' unique casual dating value proposition is authenticity. So their promise to customers, our promise, is that when you meet people, they actually seem to be truly what you thought they would be. So, so to describe the problem, first describe what the problem isn't. So a dating user might look like this on their profile, but actually look like this in real life. And this difference is not really the problem. This is fine because people kind of expect that nobody looks like that in real life. It's not real. But a true authenticity problem would be if people looked like this on their profile and this guy showed up in real life. This would not be cool. So the way that Planlos addresses this is by having time-stamped photos and videos that people upload on a regular basis so that you know what they look like recently, which would be really great because it encourages people to take unstructured, unfiltered photos quickly. And let's say that, it's really powerful. So they got a great value prop, but it's too Swedish, right? They want to expand in the US market, and they've narrowed it down to 4 features. So I just want to talk you through like one of them so you can see how it might work.
Bill, I hate to interrupt this great presentation, but I think in interest of people's time, we should maybe move on to the Q&A.
Oh, sure. And that's perfectly fine because, this whole thing, you can come and explore it on your own anytime. So let me just summarize the whole thing.
Perfect.
When you gotta do your work, it all comes down to decision making. What sort of a button, what sort of user interface pattern do I want to follow anywhere I'm working on things? And it's really bad design practice to just come up with one way to do it and say, well, do you like it or not like it? Because the like it or not like it isn't a very good feedback at all. Criticism and positive feedback that's like, I like it for this specific reason, and I don't like it because of this specific reason, helps you to move forward. And this is really a way to keep track of all those decisions so that we develop wisdom over time, as opposed to just doing stuff and hoping for the best. So that's what I would like to leave you with, that even if you don't apply all of this exactly every time, it might be a framework that helps you think about your work so that you develop wisdom in your design. Now stop, I'm out.
That was perfect. Thank you, Bill.
No problem.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any Q&A from the audience. I do have a couple questions, and I'm going to turn on the presenter modes for everybody else so that if they want to pop on, they can do so as well. So it sounds like you are both in agreement that as designers, there needs to be research and effort to back up our decisions. Why do you think this is so important in building a great product?
There it is. I mean, I think when you talk about user experience, when you talk about the whole point of the work that we're doing, it's the same as the scientific process. It's getting outside of ourselves. It's being humble. It's acknowledging that we just don't know. And especially things when you're building something, especially when you're building something new. There are so many challenges. There are so many risks. There are so many things we don't understand. If we're not researching, we're guaranteeing that we're missing something fundamental. We're gonna not be able to predict something. We're gonna make huge mistakes, and those mistakes have ramifications on potentially many people, not just in their personal lives or in their work, but like very serious ramifications for the way that we interact and connect and the way that we live. And so when we've seen this so many times, we have enough examples where technology is built without enough consideration, research, and it hurts people. People get hurt, and so research is so core and it's so fundamental, and it's the purpose, I think, of this process that we call user experience design. So, to me, that's the foundation. If you're not doing the research, you're not really doing UX.
I wholeheartedly agree, and it's I think. When it comes to the research, like you were saying, like we have to really view it from a scientific viewpoint, even though this is not like a pure science like physics, but really like hypothesis testing, especially if it's something new. Here's some guesses. Let's do some research to find out if there's any there, and then let's keep digging and iterating to figure out, what we're doing. And as much as we can before we shove it out the door, of course, because like to your point about communication, if if we don't, as designers, make friends with the engineering team by getting our ducks in a row before we hand things off to them, they're going to be like, so what crazy ass idea are you handing to me now? Oh, should I throw away all my fine work because you don't know what you're doing? And it's like, we never know exactly what we're doing, because like it's very difficult to do completely unbiased research. It's very difficult to, and it's a moving target, right? I mean, you might say, here's this app and it's really great. It's so fantastic. And now we want it to be used up by this different market. Well, how can we address this market without screwing up the people we already got? Good problem to have, but it's still, interesting. It's contentious. I mean, what I like to say to my design teams is that our product is not what we hand off to engineering. Our product is what engineering delivers to our customers. And if what they deliver, if it's not good, that's on us. We did not enable them to do that. And like to your point, Sharif, I mean, if we don't communicate effectively with them or with senior management, like we don't communicate, we don't speak the language of senior management, we don't get the resources to do what we need to do. And if we don't communicate with the engineering properly, they will not build it the way, even if we know what it should be. And then if we don't have the testing, the follow-up, the whole thing is, there's only so far you can go without a commitment to continual improvement.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you. I do have a question from one of the attendees. How do you overcome resistance from management when it comes to wanting to implement new frameworks, such as VEDAR, based on thinking that it'll be too many cooks in the kitchen?
This is a great question. This is a really important one because, and I've worked especially at larger organizations, coming in as a designer, a new designer, or even being there for a while and just saying, hey, I've got this big thing. Everyone now is adopting this, and here's the new design system. Here's the new framework. Here's the new process. It's like you're gonna piss off a lot of people. You're gonna get people frustrated. People are just gonna ignore you, and then it's gonna splinter in ways that are really detrimental to like long-term sort of viability of that cohesion in the team. So a huge challenge, and it's such an important question. The approach that I typically take is one of how do I do small incremental ways of improving someone else's or some other team or a team member's life, right? So in some cases, I created sort of a template for presentations that everyone could use to connect with. And what I did is I built an ally within another team or department or a manager. And then I went and sort of figured out this problem that engineering was having. And I figured out, okay, if I hand it off this way, or if I gave this type of information, um, this will literally just make this one pain point easier. And you have another ally, you have somebody else, and then you're in a sort of a trusting relationship. And then when things sort of there's the place, the time, and the place, you have the sort of trust and relationships that you can say, hey, look, I've heard about this new thing. I think it can dramatically improve X, Y, and Z. Do you want to consider this? And you're gonna have all these people that are like, he made my life easier last time. Yes, let's definitely try that. So I think that the sort of empathize, fix a problem, for me, it comes first. And the barging in, I've got this great thing, guys. I haven't had too much success with that.
Yeah, I agree with Sharif. It's like a progressive disclosure strategy. You know, it's like, so I'll tell you exactly how I got people on board with VEDAR. I didn't say here's this way we should do it. I said, okay, so when we're evaluating this feature list to figure out how we're going to put them on a roadmap, can I show you what what the research team has collected about the users? And then I bring it up and I show it to them. They're like, oh, and it's like, yeah, like what's your input and your, it's a visual thing. So basically I'm inviting them to look at a visual. That's why I love Figma, really. Let's look at something and throw stones at a thing. We're not going to discuss a thing that doesn't exist. Here's a thing, I want you to throw stones at it. And while you're at it, you're involving yourself. You're taking a little bit of ownership. And then they go, oh, well, while I'm in here, it's like, okay, now I want you to show the dev team. It's like, yeah, I'll talk to the dev team. I'll, kick off. And I'm not saying, hey, I'm not trying to get you to do the new process at all. I just want to have your feedback. Would you like to know what I found from these other people? Oh, here it is. And then, so I think the words, I want to impose a new process, should never come out of anyone's mouth. But I'd like you to throw stones at something. Who wouldn't like to do that? Or just when we're talking about this, here's some information that might help us, and even like taking and turning into a slide.
It looks like I have one more question from the audience. As a designer, if there was one thing you could do to convince a non-designer, such as a PM, engineer, developer, to change when communicating with you, what would it be?
One thing you'd want the other person to change?
Yeah.
I'd be tempted to unask that question, which is like a Zen thing. But I'm not, that's cheating, so I'm not going to do that. I think it's our role as designers to develop that empathy where, like, if the CEO wants to talk to me and CEO speak, they're a really busy person. I think they should speak in their language, and we should figure out how to translate it. And if PMs want to speak in their language and with a bunch of PM acronyms, it's like, that's our problem. However, I don't know. Maybe I bought some time for you, Sharif. You figure something out.
I think the framing around feedback, giving and receiving feedback, that's just one of those things that's a practice in the way the mental models we have around giving and receiving feedback. Um, and I think there are some sort of just tools around feedback, giving feedback, getting feedback that just make dialogue. It's kind of like if folks are familiar with like improv stuff. It's like this yes and language versus like but or no, where you sort of just stop things. Even maybe it doesn't work because of some constraint, right? But you sort of stop things before it sort of percolates and the creativity sort of starts flowing. And it's like initially, yeah, it's not great ideas, but if you sort of let it sort of grow, it becomes something. But you sort of kill it at the very beginning because you're aware of all these real constraints, right? So I would say this sort of language of like yes and understanding like how great and how beautiful feedback is, giving, receiving criticism, like what a joy that we're able to sort of have this trust and open up to each other and actually just make each other better. That would be my big one because I think it unlocks so much other stuff in terms of that type of communication.
All right, I thought of one thing, but this is not as good as what you said. I guess if we've got like a really healthy, trusted relationship among our design team about criticism, then gently suggesting that they provide feedback in the same way. Like, I get spooked completely out if a senior manager or a manager or a CEO says, I love it. It's like, what exactly do you love about it? Because it doesn't mean anything. And the same thing like with, that's like if an engineer came back and said, that design, it's too complex. It's like, could I engage with you around that? What is too complex? What are the, give me just a little bit more color. I know it's like outside of my design. Yeah. Because like initially some of these bits of feedback, they seem literally like just throwing rocks at a window. And it's like, well, you're just knocking down my work. I mean, maybe you haven't thought it through. But really, they're trying to communicate something. And sometimes they need a little help to, unravel it, right? And we should be halfway.
Looks like that's all the questions we have from our audience. I want to thank you both for your time, as well as the audience for their time, and bearing with us with our technical difficulties at the beginning. And yeah, me too. It wasn't just you.
No, I really appreciate y'all being patient with me about that. That's on me.
Well, I appreciate you setting this up, Mallory, and I really appreciate your presentation, Sharif. You communicated so nicely. That was really good.
Thank you.
And everyone's sticking through overcoming these little technical glitches because it's such is life, right? I mean, you can't laugh at it and say, it's all good. So thank you, Mallory.
Thanks for being here both. Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for coming to the first Friends of Figma Vancouver. Woo! Look forward to seeing you at more events.
Thanks, Bill. You're awesome. Thanks, Mallory. Really appreciate it.
Have a great evening, one and all.